Good evening, everyone. My name is Soumya, and I'm the member of the Events and Design team at Project Up. On behalf of everyone at Project Up, we're truly delighted to have you with us today for a dialogue about gender equality. Project Up is a non-profit social enterprise that works towards child welfare and urban slum development, working in accordance with Sustainable Development Goal number 4. We believe in bringing together people to hear their stories, to create an impactful dialogue and share a space to have our values and views be heard. So today we have with us Kangshi Agarwal. It is wonderful to have you with here today. And would you like to introduce yourself for the purpose of this recording?
Thank you so much. And I'm really delighted to be joining this conversation with Project Up today. Your commitment to SDGs is definitely commendable. My name is Kangshi Agarwal, and I am the founder of Nu3 Foundation. A little bit more about the foundation and myself, that the foundation exists. It's sort of India's first incubator for women in politics who aspire for a career in politics. It's almost like a 1.5-year-old organization, but I also independently work as a consultant and a policy researcher to different policy think tanks. In the past, I worked with members of parliament, worked as a political strategist. I did my master's in urban policy and governance from Tata Institute of Social Sciences. So I come from a very intersectional background, but my resolve towards SDG-5 that we are going to talk about today, which is gender equality, started way back in 2015 when Ban Ki-moon also started with this Orange the World campaign, and I was a United Nations Women's he for she's state youth advocate in Madhya Pradesh. Under the leadership of one of the very dear friends who's also an ambassador. So yeah, that is a little bit about me, and I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, so like you mentioned, today's topic is about gender inequality, which is again in accordance with Sustainable Development Goal number 5. So for the purpose of this conversation, we can classify the inequalities faced by people of different genders into two broad categories. One is discrimination and the other is violence. So there's, of course, an intersection of these two categories, such as issues of female infanticide. But making this division will make us carry the discussion forward a lot easier. So the way I want to start off is with discrimination. And that's something that I find is implicitly there as well as explicitly there in our society. Explicitly, it's pretty obvious how we see it play out in multinational corporations or even big corporations as well, where women at a greater don't get the opportunity to sort of rise through the ranks. And in a more implicit sense, we also find that in our own homes, where our parents would not let us go outside late at night. And I completely understand where they're coming from, but it is, in a sense, a form of discrimination. So I want to hear what you think about this and what are your views about this?
Yeah, so actually we are nailing the point as it is, saying that gender discrimination, to even understand the term gender, we know it is related to performance. Judith Butler has given the theory of performing genders, and it is very much different to our understanding, to our general understanding of how we discriminate between a boy and a girl and say that it is natural sex allocation. But of course, the understanding of the difference between gender and sex is somewhere at the base, that's covering the basics to even get to the point of understanding discrimination. But it definitely comes from the fact that women as a gender have been treated as the second-class citizens for a very long time. And despite all the efforts that has been made in last 70 years for, say, Indian independence, but the suffrage of women's movement go way long back, we haven't really achieved the desired level of equality or justice for women in the country. To talk about the explicit and the implicit nature of discrimination, as you rightly pointed out, there are manifestations of gender discrimination that we see around us in everyday lives, but even the implicit nature of how our languages is structured, like the use of language itself and the way language is, or what the words essentially convey or mean, or the connotations and denotations are quite gendered as well. So starting from the language that we use to communicate with each other, women are aggressive and men are assertive. Women are bossy and men are leaders. Um, I think right from the way we look at women, experience women, attach expectations with women in everyday performance of their existence, I would say, uh, is is it comes from a place of a lot of discrimination and prejudices. There is a lot of historical background on where patriarchy began. Sorry, uh, and in fact, philosophers and theorists and artists. How anonymous, every anonymous person that you read is most likely to be a woman, because she wasn't even allowed to write. I think we've come a long way, but as I say, we have like I don't know, we have centuries before we attain the gender equality that we aspire to, if we keep going at the pace as we are right now. Yeah.
I really like the idea of you bringing things from the past, where you've sort of said how these initially began and how they've manifested in the future today. I'm kind of curious, is there any possible strategy or ideology from the past that you think we can borrow to tackle this issue in the present today?
Okay. Uh, okay. So to understand that a lot of people and people around us keep referring to the way civilization came about, and how the hunter gatherer for like the the past was really, or the past of the civilization is largely built around how man came to become more aware of his surroundings and how he started his livelihoods. So I think the gender roles came about and was structured from that part of the conversation. Right now, what we can definitely borrow is, if we were to think about, say, the need of the hour is that we start understanding and dissociating genders from performance, where we say any person who is expected to go out and hunt and gather, or make livelihood for the family, can be a man or a woman or the third gender, or anybody on the spectrum, or somebody who doesn't confirm, right? So I think one of the basic things that we can borrow is that it is a need based, um, we can create a need based society where everybody does what they need to do. If I need to survive, if I need to build a life around myself, I should be able to earn myself. I should be able to feed the future generation, bring together resources, also do the housework if required, right? So I think that that understanding that the survival of the fittest, perhaps we can borrow that.
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful answer. I really like the fact that you mentioned all these different this different ideology, and then sort of brought that back into this one notion of survival of the fittest that's so commonly known by everyone, but sometimes often forgotten when referencing issues like gender inequality. I want to reference back to a thing that I mentioned earlier. It was about the fact that sometimes parents in and of themselves, consciously or subconsciously, don't allow women to sort of succeed in their own sense. And I understand where they're coming from. My parents, I do understand where they're coming from, but it in a sense affects our futures. And I kind of want to know what your views about it are. How do we strike the balance between making our parents aware of the fact that, hey, the world is out there, it's our oyster, we can go and achieve whatever we want, but then also sort of respecting their views because they come from a place of huge knowledge as well.
Yeah, I think I'll borrow from mental health theories that are very prevalent, and I benefit from the knowledge of my colleagues and peers. And we talk essentially about creating boundaries. There are boundaries that you set with people, like your friends, your partners, your colleagues, and your parents. There are boundaries that you also set with yourself. Uh, Sometimes we are too harsh on ourselves and say the meanest things to ourselves, like, you know what, you're not good enough. I think imposter syndrome is a result, or it manifests from the fact that we are too critical of ourselves. And I think we should all congratulate ourselves on just surviving this pandemic right now. But we never give enough credit to ourselves in that sense. But here, the idea of creating boundaries is that this constant conversation, that constant dialogue needs to keep happening. So I'll elicit or perhaps just bring a personal example. For example, I've grown up in a very feministic household. I am one of the rarest percentages of women. I'm who can proudly say that I'm fourth generation of working woman in my family from my maternal side. My great grandmother set up a school back in 1927, um, which means a lot, right? But it does not mean that we have really achieved, or I think I live in a very safe household, which means that my mother's idea of feminism or independence of a woman is very third wave or second wave, and we have come to the fourth wave of feminism. I identify as a fourth wave intersectional feminist, trying to understand that women are not a homogeneous group. We are all heterogeneous, and our generation's fight is different from what our mothers had to go through. For example, her life was built around being independent, and she's inculcated those voices and those points of awareness in me. She perhaps spoke more clearly and openly to me about things like sexual abuse, or going out there and finding your own mate. But at the same time, I think when I talk about political agency, right over my own body, uh, 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 how and or in what way I present myself, like physically, and the choices I made for myself, or make for myself in the political world, are very tough for her to still understand, right? So I think this is a space where we have to keep on constantly talking, conversing, ideating, and also exploring the possibilities of future while setting boundaries. Like at some point you say that, hey, I'm an adult and I have right to my own life. um, Thank you. I was so grateful for bringing us up, but at the same time, can we respect each other as human beings?
I think that was a wonderful answer to that question. I personally keep struggling with that. So I really gained that out of this conversation. And I'm sure I'm going to gain a lot more moving forward as well. I really like the fact that you also mentioned that oftentimes the vocabulary that we use around um, boys and girls is often different. So a guy often makes a mistake, whereas a girl brings shame to the family. So I want to discuss with you how a community's perception of a mistake that a girl makes differs from one that a guy makes.
I heard this beautiful TED talk, and I'm sorry if I'm missing out on the name and crediting the original source, but I definitely learned it from a TED talk that we train our boys to be brave, and we train our girls to be cautious, or fearful. um, and this was used in the example that how we usually say, hey, go out there and do this, perhaps you'll fail, but you know what, you would have given a you would have lived a good day. Perhaps that's the kind of upbringing that we want our boys to grow up with, that kind of environment where they feel that they can be experimental. But with women, you set timelines for them. You tell them that if they're going to be 30 and unmarried, it's going to be a problem because biological clock is ticking. We set them within so many. I think these boundaries that we are talking about are not only spatial, but they're also they're also temporal boundaries. We are always telling our women that you should have a plan. If this plan goes wrong, there is no backup that you can have, because your parents' home is not your home, your husband home is not your home, because that is a shared space with your father-in-law and mother-in-law and the other in-laws. So when does a woman really get her own home? And when does I think Virginia Woolf's A Room of One's Own has, it will never lose meaning until women are told that, okay, this home is your home. You can make mistakes and you can commit mistakes and come back and tell us, as long as it's not criminal. You can go out there, explore yourselves. But I think society's perception, because we place too much importance on a woman's body. Um, Everything associated women is sexualized. It is either a matter of shame or pride. Um, I think we live in extremes when we talk about women in this country and in the world, for that matter.
Yeah, I really liked your answer to that question as well. I'm so glad I'm getting so much out of this conversation just hearing you talk about this. I wish this
No,
wasn't
thank
just
you.
20 minutes and it went out for an hour as well. But sort of moving towards the second part of the discussion, which was about violence that is often faced by women. Every woman either is a woman or knows a woman that has been harassed. And I use the term over here to define sexual violence, to define violence that is done either on the streets or um, even for that matter, I would even consider catcalling to be a form of harassment, which is definitely a form of harassment. So, what are ways in which we can ensure that we educate not only our women but also our men in a situation that we recognize that this is harassment and we teach them how to sort of cope with it and prevent it moving forward?
I think the question is very structural. The answers to it are not simple. The approaches have to be multi-pronged. But I definitely believe in working with men as allies to end violence against women, but also for because, okay, one thing I just want to set it right for the audience and anybody hearing to this dialogue or this conversation, is that we live in a patriarchal society does not mean that only men are violent towards women. Um, Not only men, but there can be women who are violent towards women, and also a great possibility that men are allies already. They're already allies. So patriarchy is not gender in the sense that patriarchy can come from anybody. It can come from, in fact, we are sometimes misogynistic towards ourselves, because we have been conditioned to think in a certain way, right? So that is a constant check that we need to keep. We have a lot to unlearn. One thing is for sure, that we need to unlearn a lot of conditioning that we've grown up with. Second, we cannot always say that it's only men who are going to change the society, and if they stop behaving in a certain manner. Because if you go to the rural India and experience, not even rural India, if you go to India in any capacity and start surveying people or talking to people, you'll realize that a lot of women do not go very well, very well along with their mothers-in-law. Um, why is that? Because we understand that this idea that a daughter-in-law is an external person in the family, right? And that is where violence also becomes very layered, because it's the entire family that could, one, be a victim, because they are the girl's family, and they can also be perpetrators, right? So one, that the answer is very layered, of course, because it's a structural issue, and we need to start teaching our boys to be, of course, more affable and more understanding, more accepting, from the young age. I think that's how you work. I really think that Bonvita had this campaign long ago. It said that बच्चों का दिमाग का विकास 0 से 5 साल की उम्र तक हो जाता है. And if that is true, we need to stop doing these gender reveal parties, where we associate, blue with boys and pink with girls. You are gendering children who have just been born. literally you're expecting too much out of them already. So I think this is just one example of how we can do it, but there are so many things, right from teaching our boys, yes, to know that they're born in an unequal society, and it will be upon them and unto it them to undo the the doings of the past. And similarly, we have to place that trust and freedom and faith and love in women, that they can be free and they can be themselves in the society. I think we should stop expecting women to understand everything from the time that they're born.
As we sort of nearing the end of this discussion, I want to hear about your organization, which is the Nu3 Foundation, which represents women in politics, which helps increase representation of women in politics. Would you like to shed more light on it and tell us more about it?
Yeah, so thank you for actually bringing that question up, because the moment we also talk about violence, uh, so one, I want to talk about politics, patriarchy, and power. I think this is also interrelated because um, politics is not something that is anyway external to us. Personal is political, and I will stand by it. When I also say that power and patriarchy is interrelated, it also means that we place too much power in the system, in the patriarchal system, to do the resource allocation, in which women are always the second clement to anything that is on the table. Once we shift this power balance, we try to equalize it, bring more women into the representation. As you know, that India has barely or measly 14.3% women in Indian Parliament. That is after 73 years of independence. We started at 5%. We are only at 14.3%. It is 9.3% growth in 73 years. It will take more than 100 years for us to achieve proportionate, adequate, effective representation of women in politics. And this is what NETRI wants to, exactly target. This is our problem statement. We are targeting at the lack of proportionate, adequate, and effective representation of women in politics. But one of the key pointers that came through this conversation, that violence is a very big deterrence for women joining politics. About 60% women want to steer clear of even joining and considering this career, because the perception and the fear of being violated in the profession. 90% of them are discouraged once they have joined it. So I think, and of course, the SDG-5, within that 5.5.1 talks about women in decision making, in politics. The national average, I think the international average of women in parliament is about 25%, and we in India are still at 14.3%. In the grassroots, it's somewhere about 36%, if I'm not wrong. Yeah, and to just think about that, we gave 50% representation to women at the grassroots in panchayats and municipality. 21 states have given it. 33% is reserved for all the states at that level. We did it like back in the early 90s, right? 1992, 1993, the 73rd and the 74th Amendment. And still, the society, as I call it, has created this proxy position called Sarpanch Patis and Municipal Patis, who operate on behalf of women in politics or in positions of power. So we again are challenging this whole system, top to bottom, and bottom to the top as well. The idea is to get more women in politics, to train them, to make politics cool, to make politics aspirational, to change the narrative about politics, to use politics as a tool of change, to bring women who are also committed to understanding feminist way of politics, right? And I think it will not be limited to women at some point. It will go beyond the scope of only women, and it will be about equal politics. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you so much for talking about your organization and also taking out the time to talk to us today. As we come towards the end of this very short dialogue, I would like to take this time to express my heartiest gratitude to you for such an insightful and inspiring conversation. We're truly grateful for you to join us today. And I'm sure the listeners who have joined us as well would have loved the conversation. Is there any closing
Thank you.
remarks that you want to give?
Thank you so much for hosting me. Definitely. Thanks to Project Up. Thanks to Samya. Um, Also, the partners, UNESCO. And I would just like to say that we need to teach our girls to be brave, and we need to allow them to be freer. We can come from a lot of concern, but at the same time, we need to equip them with the tools that will help them change the world for the betterment of the future.
Yeah, that was wonderful. That was an amazing closing remark, and I absolutely loved having this conversation with you today. Thank you.
Same here. Same here. Bye bye.